Three, two, one. Welcome to this published author's interview. My name is Kenneth Muyingo, and with me I have a special guest that I will be interviewing. But first, I just want to mention, if you watch this interview and you would like to write a book yourself, to become an author and write your first book, click on the link that is with this interview and join the group, become an author and write your first book, to connect with like-minded people who are doing the same. With that said, I would like to get into the interview by asking my guest to say hello to you and to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Barakah Smith. I'm actually from the US of A in Georgia on the Southeast Coast. Love my Georgia. I am a previous military brat, married a Marine. Didn't actually get into myself, but I dabbled with all the military aspects of it. Got married, settled down, no kids yet, but I'm the happy fur mama of a dog and 2 cats. Love those things.
Wow. Yes, go on.
I recently published my first book, Stranger in a Familiar Place, and I'm happy to be here. This is going to be fun.
Wow, thank you so much. So you are, how did you say, military?
Military brat.
Wow. Well, quite a profile. Thank you so much for making time for us to do this interview. I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to do this. You are also a publisher. You've written a book. You say it's Stranger in a Familiar Place?
That's the title of the book.
Amazing. Tell us about your book and the vision that you have for this book.
So the vision when I first came out of this book is I wanted everybody to know that they had a choice between 2 things, either life or death. And I say that not so much as a heavy thing, but in the little things that we do, we should always choose life. You know, my husband and I, whenever we're about to make a decision, that might not be beneficial for us, we're like, choose life, So I wanted people to realize that their life is made up of choices, good, bad, or indifferent, regardless of, what religion you are, what race you were, however you wanted to put it, that you had a choice in how your stories end up and how you respond to things, regardless of what happens, regardless of the situations or the outcomes, you still have a choice of what you're going to do about each and every situation. And the hope is that you will choose the better things. So that's kind of how the story came about, tagged in with another theory of what happens when we actually die, or when we get into that place of limbo or purgatory, as like people say, or have those out-of-body experiences. You hear people that they went to heaven, they went to hell, they saw old friends, new friends. And so paired with that kind of got the story of Stranger in a Familiar Place into fruition, so to speak.
Wow. Wow. Stranger in a Familiar Place. I'm curious. You've sparked my curiosity, and I just wanted to know what inspired you to write this book.
So I actually had an out-of-body experience as a child. When I was about 10 years old, I can remember I fell asleep in my dad's arms, and then I can vividly remember looking at myself, sleep in my dad's arms, him watching the news, and I can remember every detail about it. I can remember what he was watching. I can remember what I was wearing. I can remember what he was wearing, who was up, who was not up, who came to kiss him goodnight as I was asleep. And I remember all these details and found out later they were true. And nothing necessarily significant happened, while I was there. I just can remember watching this scene in front of me. And that happened about 2 more times. And then by the age of 12, I've never had that again. So that's kind of where it all began for me, having this thought process of, okay, what happens when, people go into that in-between state of life and death, and what are the choices that affect us in our reality, so to speak, that affect those in and out of between life and death sort of thing. So that's where it kind of all stemmed from, is that experience I had as a child.
Wow. Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. It's quite an experience.
Yeah,
And
it's kind of weird when you really think about it, but I guess these things happen.
yeah, it is. And sometimes maybe things happen, and if we're not like conscious of it, we are not able to like draw the lessons and to understand what life was trying to teach us through it. I'm reminded there's a quote by Steve Jobs. He says, "We cannot connect the dots looking forward, but we can, from where we are, connect the dots backwards and see how things happen the way they did. And we can connect them up to right where we are and trust that the dots will connect forward to where we would like to go." And it's quite unique that you looked back on this experience and you decided to draw the lessons out of it, to just try and understand it more deeply, in a sense, because I think life is, that's what life is all about, that we go through certain things, and because of what we have gone through, there's lessons that life exposes to us. And but we have to be intentional about drawing those lessons out of the experience. And thank you so much for doing this. So I, stranger in a familiar place.
Mhm.
Wow. Tell me about how did you come up with the title?
So actually, I have to give credit to my father when I was writing the story. And by the way, this book is totally fiction, the story in of itself. So it's fantastical in all its ways. It's been akin to more like a C.S. Lewis. But when I was trying to come up with a good title for it, I really was just giving away the plot every time I even thought of a good title for it. I'm like, this is not working.
Yeah,
And one day I happened to be on the phone with my father, and I was just telling him, I was like, "Yeah, Daddy, I'm writing my book." And I got to the end of it, and I don't even know what to call it. I wrote the whole book, and I still don't know what to call it.
yeah.
And he's like, "Well, what's it about again?" And I told him what happens in the book and all sorts of things. And he's like, "This just sounds like a stranger in a familiar place." I was like, "Oh my gosh, Dad, that's brilliant." I was like, that perfectly depicts what happens to this,
Wow.
to this character without giving anything away.
Yeah. Wow. 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 Thank you so much. I mean, it does help to have a supportive network, and family, I think, is just one of those things that we can always rely on. And how did you choose the topic for the book?
So the topic for the book was honestly kind of just really simple for me. When I said I wanted to write a story, I wanted it to be meaningful.
Yeah.
Again, C.S. Lewis is the reason why I hold it as such a high compliment is because C.S. Lewis is such a wonderful writer, and he has such a poignant message that, several years, decades later, it still holds weight and it still holds value, and it's still one of the most beloved stories in literature just because of the world that he created. And on the surface, if you just want a good story, there's a story there, but there's also lessons hidden, within what he writes, which I thought was just amazing and endearing in it and of itself. So what I set out to do is that I wanted to do the same, honestly. I wanted a story that was fun and fantastical in on its own, but if you really wanted a good message, it was there, and all you had to do was look for it. And I thought the story of choice was a good segment for that.
Yeah. Wow. Indeed, it's one of those things, and I like where you started from as far as the aspect of choice is concerned. That we always have these choices, and it's up to us to choose life, regardless of what happens. And do you consider yourself as a naturally talented writer, or is writing a skill that you have developed over time?
I would say the writing portion of it is a skill that I developed over time. Um, Growing up, I hated reading and writing. both of them. My mother was still very avid about making sure, my education was well-rounded. She always took us to the library every Wednesday, and we had to pick out a nonfiction book, a fiction book, and historical book.
Wow.
So I hated those days. I really did as a child anyway. Now I look
Wednesday.
back on them fondly, but I really hated those days going to the library. Um, but then one day ironically, came across one of the Harry Potter books that J.K. Rowling wrote, one of her first books, the Sorcerer and the Stone.
Uh,
And I read it, and it's not necessarily that I became such a big Harry Potter fan. It was the fact that this woman wrote a world that I truly believe that I could go to my car, drive down to it, and I could go there. And it was just so vivid for me. The characters were alive, the world was flesh, and I was just like, if she can do that, there's gotta be other worlds and other stories and other authors that can take me to places I have never even thought about before.
and it,
And then from there, you really couldn't keep a book in my hand for very long. Like I've devoured reading, just trying to find that next big adventure on the way,
uh,
which obviously started me writing my own adventures at that point. And it started off with short stories. I would just write about anything that came to my head. One thing I did not lack was imagination, because I had that in spades. But I would write about anything and everything, even dreams that I had as a child. I would go back. I'm like, oh, that'd be a fantastic short story, and I would write some short stories. Soon that translated over into me entering contests within my local school and winning a good few of them within my local community. Um, then I had the aspirations, like I want to be an author, but never thought I was good enough for it. So actually, Stranger in My Familiar Place is the first official publication I've ever had. Um, Everything else has just been in back doors. So I've have novels, several novels actually, just still sitting on my flash drive that may one day come to light. But I think I totally had to build the skill first before I ever came out, for sure.
I think it's important indeed as far as this is concerned, because so for you, the journey for writing was inspired from reading. That you
Yeah.
were reading all the Harry Potter book, and then you were like, there's got to be more of this somewhere. And then once you went looking, you realized that there was not just more out there, but there was some in here. And then the inspiration started.
Indeed, that's honestly the perfect way to put it. I was inspired to write by reading someone else's work.
Indeed, it's amazing. And I have another friend who said something very profound. He said, reading and writing go together. It's like breathing. When you read, you are breathing in, and writing is only natural in the sense that the more you read, the better you write. It's like just breathing out. And what you say, I'm like, I see what you mean as far as this is concerned, that you just get to the next level almost automatically. Um, but when you look at your journey, the experience that you shared with me about your out of body experience when you were 10, and the journey that you have been on as far as life is concerned up to now, what would you tell me is the one thing that has happened to you personally that has had the greatest impact on you writing? Because from first you said you hated reading, you hated writing, and then something happened somewhere. Is there a point that you can point to and say, this is what happened? And I was like, I gotta write.
Honestly, it was that first book. That reading that first book really opened my eyes. It's kind of like, with music, being exposed to different music, and you realize that there's different beats, there's different melodies, there's different harmonies, and they're not all the same, and you can read them in so many infinitely different ways, and it creates just this new song, new harmony, new orchestra, in the same way that reading did that for me. It opened my eyes, like, okay, reading is not just boring. reading is not just about this one particular subject or this particular subject. This is something that I can do. You know, as I said, I had a very vivid imagination as a kid.
Yeah,
The backyard was my playground, and I would, be on pirating adventures, Lost Islands, and you name it. I would have done it,
yeah,
and it kind of struck a chord in me. Like, wait a minute, I do that all the time, except I just don't put it on paper.
yeah,
I was like,
yeah,
what if I just did the same thing and just
exactly.
put it on paper?
Yeah,
So that, I mean, honestly, that book is not necessarily that the JK's work, and I was a huge, huge fan of her. She's a phenomenal writer, but I never became a huge fan of the series. It's just that the series taught me something that you kind of been writing things all along, except you just been doing it orally. You could put it down
exactly,
on paper. You could try your hand at it, and you can
exactly.
create these things that inspired you. I always kind of had the picture of the little girl finding my book and reading it and having the same effect. And I'm just like,
Yeah,
that would be awesome.
yeah. Wow, wow, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's how can I say this? It's like we get inspiration out of the the things and the people that we connect with as far as life's journeys are concerned. And I think that's the beauty of us being on this planet together as human beings. I'm a firm believer that if it was possible for us to just do life alone, we would all be on our own small individual planets and
Mm,
do life by ourselves and pass on into the afterlife. But the fact that we are together here, it says a lot about us needing and having to work together to achieve great things and to get inspiration from each other. So thank you so much for sharing that. And you mentioned that you have other books that are sitting on your hard drive. And I want to ask a question. What are
okay.
you going to do with that? Are
Well,
you
there.
currently working on any other projects or this is it?
No, I am definitely working on another project. I'm actually working on the indirect sequel to Stranger in a Familiar Place. One of the main characters in Stranger in a Familiar Place is a polar bear named Malak. And I love Malak's character so much. And as soon as I was done writing this book, I was like, I'm not done with you, bro. You got to come back into another book. So he's
Yeah.
coming back in the second book, and it is loosely tied to the first one, and will make some mentions to the first one. But I couldn't leave Malak alone. So Malak's going to come back for a second book. After I get done with that second book, I am going to take a peek at what I wrote a long time ago as a child, and it's a
Awesome.
story that I was really fond of. It was probably the longest story I ever wrote as a child, but never really quite finished it as far as like I wrote it in a series in mind. So I want to go back and take a look at that one and see if I can't bring it back to life and put more polish on it.
Awesome. 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 And what is the working title you're using for this new project that you're working on? I'm curious.
Well, the working title is pretty much a play on the first one. So
Okay.
it would be a familiar person in a strange place. So
Aha. Very nice. Very nice. Wow. Thank you so much for making time for this interview. It's been very insightful and very inspiring for me and also for our viewers and listeners, I know. But I just want to ask, where can people buy your book?
the book is available on Barnes and Noble and Amazon in paperback and ebook. Those of you that have iTunes, it is available in ebook version on iTunes.
Very nice. We will put the links with the interview so that people can access the book. And how can people connect with you? If somebody watches this interview and they would like to connect with you, if you would like that, how would they do that?
So the easiest way to get a hold of me would be at Barakah Smith on Twitter. That right now is my platform that I'm using to promote the book as well as just my author page in general. In the future, after I'm done with Stranger in a Familiar Place, it will morph into just a general all around author site for me to promote my works, contests, that kind of thing. So that would be the best place to do it. I also have a Facebook page, Stranger in a Familiar Place. So if anybody wants to go on there and just see any updates on the book, any relative contests on the book, too familiar, Stranger in a Familiar Place, they can do that there.
Very nice. We'll put the links with the interview as well. And whenever you watch it, you can connect with her directly through the links that are on the interview. And my last question, is there anything else that you would like to mention that we have not addressed in the interview?
Yes, I actually just want to take a moment to, for all my budding authors out there. Honestly, this first book was a chance on myself. When writing my first book, and I had to imagine my book next to my favorite authors, such as Frank Peretti or C.S. Lewis, there was a real big fear there of, is it worthy enough to stand on a shelf next to those great writers? Is my book good enough for that? And it really kind of became debilitating, almost, to where it was like I'm not going to be ever good enough for it.
Ah,
So this book was literally a chance on myself. I was able to get the feedback I needed in order to see where I was, where my writing, my current writing abilities, and the story, the flow, how it went. So my encouragement for you guys to be is that if you're worried about taking a shot on yourself, do it. You never know the connections, the people you're going to come across, and just the overall benchmark that you're going to find yourself at. Most people say, well, I don't like negativity. And my thing for that would be is, don't see it as negative. Take the criticism that's in it. So if they say your work sucks, ask them, well, why didn't you like it?
ah,
And if they say, well, your characters weren't developed, it was too short, or you got to the point way too quickly, take those notes. It's only going to make you feel better. And honestly, that I had the same lumps and bumps growing up, and giving my works to other people, and taking those criticisms and then making them better will only make you a better writer in the beginning. So we can't be afraid of that criticism, as long as it's constructive criticism.
indeed.
Make sure that you guys are taking those to heart to make yourselves better writers, and just take a shot at yourself. You never know what's going to happen when you do.
Wow, thank you so much. This is very well said. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege for me to be able to do this with you, and I will sure be keeping in touch with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been a wonderful conversation.
You're welcome.